Hello, my name is Denise Cooper, and I am here today to talk to you a little bit about the famous Irish COVID contact tracing app and the role of open source strategies in that endeavor. And so I work for Nearform, the company that wrote that application for the Health Services Executive of Ireland. But I am also their main open source strategist, so I was very involved in the topic that we're going to talk about today. So, first of all, when COVID became known as a problem, it was just before St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. And traditionally, St. Patrick's Day is a day for celebration. The day before St. Patrick's Day, I got a call asking if I was interested in bringing an opportunity to my company about writing a contact tracing app for the HSE. And in that call, I also learned that they were going to be shutting down most of the traditional St. Patrick's Day things and that we would be in lockdown. And so, it felt like sort of the end of the world in one sense, but also an amazing opportunity to do something and be of some assistance. Because when you're in lockdown, open source developers actually are not very bothered by being in lockdown because we already work remotely. But it definitely felt like a shifting, like kind of the end of our world as we know it. And being able to contribute was something that we were very keen to do. And at the time, we hadn't even sized the commercial opportunity. We just knew that it was something we could do. And so we set about to create a bid and build a team to do this. Now, Nearform is a small company. It's about 120 employees currently. Spread all around the world. They're mostly best in breed, as in we hire at the high end of expertise in certain technologies, notably Node.js. We are the largest single contributor to the Node.js core most quarters. And we put a lot of free work into Node because we gain so much value from it. So, we were an interesting choice. Of course, a hometown choice, always nice when the government employs people that are from the country that is going to be served, but also we had experience with rapid deployment. So, we are an open source first company because of the belief of our CEO in the phenomenon of Node and other projects like Node. The rapidity of innovation in the Node community was really interesting to him as he was setting up Nearform. And he has historically given back a fair amount of free labor, if you will, to the open source community in the form of employing certain experts who are already working in that community but need a little financial support to be able to more fully devote themselves. He's been doing that for a long time. At the time that the HSE came to us, there was no thought of whether this code would result in an open source project. It was just the fact that we could rapidly prototype and iterate, and they could get to deployment very quickly because we have all of these open source projects, which we call accelerators, that help us put together technology faster. So, the other issue, which they were very aware of at the moment that they called us, was that there was a need to build trust in the government. There had been a study out of Oxford University that suggested, it was sort of media clipped, the information from that study, and the clip said that if you didn't get 60% penetration of your app, you weren't going to be very successful with a contact tracing app. Now, it turns out that that clip was taken out of context, and the scientist who wrote that report has later updated the information. What he actually said was, in the absence of any other measures you might be doing, if contact tracing is the only thing you're doing, you need 60%. But the HSE already had many of the other pieces in play, including enough lab capacity to actually do proper testing, and not quite enough hospital capacity, so a real desire to flatten the curve so that we didn't top out our hospital capacity in the first wave, and also trained professionals who could make phone contact with people. So a network of contact that the HSE could maintain with people who are identified. So we were aware that privacy advocates were probably going to be unhappy about this app because it appeared to be a Big Brother app that would be watching them in their day-to-day work. And we went through three iterations of full iterations of the application where Nearform wrote a working version and it was tested. The first two were based on work that had been done by other countries, and I'll get to that later. But we were able to rule them out as winning approaches fairly quickly. And we focused on the third iteration. Most of the second half of the work that we did was refining that third iteration, which was built privacy first to be GDPR compliant, which meant that we were breaking the mold of how epidemiologists like to think about tracing and how you find a patient zero and work backwards from there. Basically, we don't know who people are. As the data is collected, it's collected locally on phones, encrypted in such a way that neither us nor the phone owner can get at it until, if someone gets ill, then we go ahead and ask them if they have the app, and if they do, we ask them if they would mind giving us that data by sending their keys up to a central key server. Those keys are then broadcast out to every single phone that is hosting that app. And if there are any matches, the match is made at the phone. So we don't know who or where people are. We only know that there's a phone. When they call us to say, hey, I got this notification, we're able to put two and two together finally, but we don't actually surveil anybody in the process. In order to prove that, the HSE publicly posted the code of the winning candidate early so that a dialogue could occur between the HSE and Nearform and privacy advocates. And this activity created some real trust. And in fact, by the time we released the app, they were publicly advocating for us to release it. We got no tweets that said, be afraid, be very afraid. Everybody was supportive. And that contributed to us getting close to 30% of the adults in Ireland enrolled within the first couple of days, which was huge. We only needed about 14% to have impact, but getting 30%, and now it's almost up to 60% over time, has been really gratifying and helpful. So I mentioned before that we had talked to some other governments. Singapore released their first swag at an app right as we were getting started, and they were very generous to talk to us about their design choices and their concerns, and they shared the data that resulted from that in the large, like statistics about percentage of response and number of people they were saying had been contacted, that kind of thing. And what we learned very quickly is that the approach that they took was not working. The approach has to do with the limitations that Apple puts on uses of BLE. So BLE stands for Bluetooth Low Energy. There are many things that BLE can do, including proximity, and there's a number of things it can do. But Apple has decided that tracing actual location is a step too far because it's too easy to figure out who individuals are. It's a privacy breach. And so Singapore had backed off on the idea of location tracing, and they weren't getting very high quality data at the time. Now, everybody in the world was having to figure this out in real time, and there were lots of different approaches. Some of them involved using GPS, which Apple was really against. Some of them involved just using BLE to its full extent, which is what we ended up adopting. But there's also the question of centralized versus decentralized data. And Singapore had chosen a centralized data model, which made sense for them because of the way that that country is governed and the way they think about surveillance. But it wasn't working as a way to get people to adopt and trust the app, even though they were mandating use. So we got that information from them. That helped us switch and pivot to a different idea. We were also talking to Germany. Germany was looking at sophisticated encryption and convincing the European Union that that would be a good standard to promote across all the apps around Europe. And so that also caused us to pivot slightly. And we were talking to Apple and Google directly, and those conversations were surprisingly fruitful for such a small country, but we did, leverage some relationships there. We do have hospitality relationships with both of those companies. They host facilities in Ireland. So anyway, it was a global effort. We had a lot of design considerations. The HSE mandated this lovely yellow color, and it is used throughout Ireland to indicate COVID information. But we did some interesting things with the design with the help of the HSE, and probably one of the most interesting is as time has gone on, we have added more and more data to people who are carrying the app about how the nation is doing. And that is really helpful. So there is a symptom tracker. People can check in every day, and they can also discreetly say which symptoms they're experiencing, which is useful to them if they do develop COVID. But it also helps us see how people are feeling. But behind that second, in the second pane, that national picture arrow, that's what the other two slides are. And what that shows you is where we're at in terms of the whole country. And this allowed people to make informed decisions about where to spend their time during the summer months when they were trying to, thread the needle and get away from home for something like a vacation, trying to pick places where they were less likely to encounter COVID, for instance. It's been really useful, and it's really helped build the install base and the trust that people have because we're being transparent. And this is part of the open source ethos that we basically permeated this whole effort with. That's really what I'm here to talk about today. So we made an executive decision at Nearform after we created the Irish app, and it was so successful. We started getting requests from near countries and then later some further away countries and states in the United States. And we engaged those people and, took money to give them a customization of the same code base. But we are, again, a very small company, and we did the cost-benefit analysis and realized there was no way that we could actually serve the entire world. So looking at that, we decided, remember the code had already been published publicly for the purposes of the privacy advocates getting comfortable with the idea, and that was very successful. But that's different than doing a real open source project where you're actually building community with other people, meaning you're answering their questions about implementation, you're accepting their pull requests, you're updating the upstream code base with the modifications that are made as part of your business. These are all aspects of doing real open source. And so we did a back of the envelope cost-benefit analysis that went something like this. Every country will have made a decision about this by December. We are already at full capacity. We can take maybe one more round of customers. But if the whole world uses this code base, we have a much better chance of creating synergies when people get back to traveling. We can let them carry their home app to the country that they're going to and actually have meaningful interaction with our borders and our data. So we decided to contribute to the Linux Foundation Public Health Initiative. Now, we were already kind of friends of the Linux Foundation through Node. I was involved in helping save the Node project from oblivion as it was forking a few years ago, and it landed at the Linux Foundation. But also, there's an organization called Finos, or FinTech Open Source, that recently moved to Linux Foundation, and we were already members of it. So this was kind of home base for us. Linux Foundation was very excited to take our code base, which is called COVID Green App in their world, because it was already proving efficacious. We were getting good data back. We were finding asymptomatic cases, people that were spreading COVID without realizing it was happening, by triangulating through the contacts that many people that got sick had. And we were doing a really good job with this app, unexpectedly, fantastically. We thought that if the world could get access to this, it could only be good. And so we did open source it fully there. And there's about a single FTE, over 3 people who are working part-time to make sure that that effort is fully supported with information and contacts and participation in webinars and those kinds of things. And there are definitely people picking up that code base and using it that are not contacting us for consulting. So, it's good to see, right? So what's next? Well, in about a week, a very large number of people will start using our app in the United States. And when that happens, we will be at about 60 million people using our code base around the world. This is completely unheard of for Irish technology. And in fact, they were a little daunted to realize that they were in the lead. But now Ireland is addicted to the idea of transparency and open source as a way to get to this place from a tiny nation. And so I think you can expect more engagement in open source, both through academia and through government in Ireland. And I also think that our code base will continue to be used. It's starting to see adoption in Africa now, which is really gratifying because, that's a really big continent. And the thing about this virus is you want to keep it controlled so that it can't mutate too much, because that just creates more problems for everybody again. But having it be used in the US and in the more populous side of the US is also really gratifying for us because, again, we're a global company. So we have people who work in those places. And it's really cool that we can, something that we worked on can help them directly. So that's the story. You've heard hopefully a little bit about how you make decisions, how you think about IP. I will say, as a last parting shot, one of the basic things about open source is producing more value than you try to monetize. It's a gift culture. Leaving some value on the table and greasing the wheels for the innovation engine that is open source is a critical part of keeping the commons green and healthy and everybody moving forward. And that is very much what Nearform and the HSE demonstrated with their actions, and to great effect. So I hope you can see that this is a great example of how to do open source properly and how to think about it to both provide adoption and also to change a landscape very quickly. Thank you so much for your time. If you're interested in contacting me, here's my contact information. And I'd be happy to talk more about this and about how you can get a leg up on thinking properly about open source. Thank you.